Thanks so much for joining us today, everybody. This is the first in a series of five interviews with our agency new business thought leaders. Today, I'm speaking with Barclays' Jason Parks. As managing director, Jason oversees all of Barclays' client relationships as well as business development for the 400-person agency. He's helped spearhead the growth of Barclay over the past 5 years, leading Barclay to become one of the largest independent agencies in the country. He's led the business development efforts and ongoing strategy for brands including Target, Dairy Queen, Spirit Airlines, Applebee's, and Hershey's. He was recently honored as one of Kansas City's 40 most influential business leaders under the age of 40. Boy, I remember those days long ago.
That bullet point might be a couple of years old now.
That's okay.
Somewhat recent.
We won't tell anybody. Appreciate you being with us today, Jason. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of work my way through some of the questions that you provided for our thought leader survey and ask you a couple of questions about them. This is sort of an open conversation, so feel free to contribute in any way that you'd like. The folks that will be watching today are either agency owners themselves or agency new business people that are looking to kind of better their process and improve the way in which they go to market and manage their agency new business. So start with the first question. We asked, how often, if ever, do you segment your prospects to receive different types of content? We had 14% said never, 49% said sometimes, and 36% said always. Just sort of a general question, why, in your opinion, do you feel it's important for agencies to segment when they're reaching out to prospects in an agency new business program?
Yeah, I mean, we found in our experience that it's key, especially as the competitive marketplace gets stronger and stronger, and it's harder to pick up business because what clients are looking for are experts in their category. We've done research and have seen research that, especially in the initial stages of a pitch, when they're putting a short list together, that's where they're going out to look for. To make that first cut, you've got to be an expert in their category. So that's why we find it important when we're doing any sort of outreach or content on behalf of the agency to make it as custom and segmented as possible to a specific vertical.
Okay. Were you surprised at all to see how few were doing that always, or were the numbers kind of what you expected?
I was a little surprised when I first saw the data, again, because we have a belief that it's really important. But as I started to dig in, I know we're going to get to some other questions. I think one of probably the biggest issue or the challenge may be a lack of dedicated staff. I saw that as an answer later. So it can be a challenge to get to segmented, custom content. But what I would offer is there's, even some small tweaks that you can make, whether it's your case studies, et cetera. You don't have to overhaul everything for a segment. You can kind of take that base content and then can you find a way to do small tweaks so that even if it's just in the results section, so that it ties to specific results that may be tied to a category. So it doesn't maybe have to be as daunting as some people make it out to be.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I was going to ask you, what you thought typically gets in the way of agencies being able to do this, and you suggested just dedicated resources. Anything else that you've seen or you believe might be, preventing agencies from doing this other than, maybe just being a little lazy and not wanting to put the time against it?
I think it probably is more of the dedicated resources because we're at a point now if you think about the tools that are available in which to, get content out in the world.
Sure.
That's pretty easy now. It's not as challenging. So I think it's probably just amount of dedication and taking that time to look at the content and find ways to make it as custom to a vertical as possible.
And I'm just curious, can mass emails that aren't segmented be effective? Have you seen that work? And if so, why or when would they be more effective or just generally effective to use? Or are you just simply not a big proponent of those?
No, I think they can. I think whenever you can make it more specific, you're probably going to see better results. But
Sure.
there are, whether it's even just sharing later your latest creative or latest research that may be broader across the consumer segment that may not be focused on a vertical. I think that's okay and can get attention for your agency. I think it's just when it gets to that time where they're making short list of we're going to go start with, we're going to talk to 10 shops or we're going to RFP this. I think to make that cut, that's where they have to see whether it's on your website or at some in your content channels that, okay, these guys are experts in that space. So I think it is okay in some cases, especially when you're blasting out to share broader messaging. But once you get their attention, they need to find somewhere within your owned properties that, okay, they get my space too.
Yep. Yep. Okay, cool. Anything else you want to add before we move on to the next question?
No, I guess I just repeat that I would challenge if your challenge is lack of resources. I think maybe rethink what's the the simplest way to make small tweaks. Again, I don't think you have to have a completely different set of content. I mean, it's great if you can, but it doesn't have to be all very completely segmented and different. Can you take a unified case study or story and just find ways to customize it slightly for when you're sending it out so that it feels like it's to a specific segment?
Sure. Yeah, or find an interesting article and speak to that segment and its implications for that segment. You're not having to write an entire blog post about it or something like that. That's another way to possibly consider it. So.
Absolutely. And one example, I think we get a lot of credit in the marketplace for understanding modern consumers and millennials specifically, sort of where we started.
Mm-hmm.
And when we would do research, we'd have a point of view that sort of covered that audience as a whole, but then would ask them a specific, just a few questions that were specific, that would be specific to a vertical, whether it be CPG, retail, or et cetera, to where you're just adding maybe even a sentence or two within the context of that broader content that makes it, oh, these guys get me. So it can be small. So I guess that'd be my challenge is maybe it may not be as daunting as you think it is to customize the segment.
Oh, that's great. Great advice for, smaller agencies that just simply don't have the resources. So moving on to our next question, we asked, what do you find are the most effective channels or platforms to support your new business program? And we gave agency folks the ability to respond to as many as they wanted to. I guess same question here. Any surprises in what you see in the results here? Kind of scattered in terms of what folks are using, but any surprises or kind of meet your expectations in terms of what you thought you'd see?
Mm-hmm. There was one surprise to me, and it was I'd call it maybe it was a good surprise, and it was around the number two most effective channel or platform was speaking engagements, and I was surprised to see that as high as it is, and would reinforce that I would argue that might be the number one even, or it has, we've invested a lot in that space. And I was surprised and delighted to see that's working for other agencies. So again, going back to my earlier comments, the more that you can segment out and look like an expert in a particular space, whether that's through email content or in this case, speaking engagements where you've really got a live expert there, I think that's fantastic. So I would encourage that even more. And that's, that takes time and people too to do that. So
definitely. Yeah, I was going to ask you, where, looking at this list, are there one or two or three areas where Barkley puts most of its effort against, or is it pretty kind of spread out and diversified depending on the prospect or industry?
It would be, I would lump some of these together. I mean, our biggest push is, and it's no surprise, I think what's working for a lot of agencies is, again, showing that you're an expert in the space. So it's your content model, whether that's the research that you do, whether it's through blogs, in this case, speaking engagements, however you can package a content model where you're an expert and where those prospects are reaching out to you versus you trying to cold call. And I mean, we still do those things too, but the most effective is when we're seen in the marketplace as a leader in a particular industry or vertical, and then they're calling us saying, hey, we need your help. So
So
Um,
if I'm a small agency, and I'm thinking about, doing what you're suggesting and using speaking engagements as kind of a, one way in, any suggestions on how to maybe approach it, or, kick off an initiative that involves speaking? Any
yeah,
thoughts there?
I think it starts with, obviously, again, before you're going to get many speaking engagements, they have to see you as an expert. So one
Yeah.
of the things that we use is we always start with a pretty in-depth research report, so
Okay.
that we can come with a point. And again, that's not typically doesn't have to be a big expense, but for whatever the topic is or whatever the vertical that we're trying to go after, we'll start with some research so that there's a hook on why you should listen to me talk about a specific topic, because I've got something new to share and something that's relevant to you. So I think that, to me, would be my biggest tip: is start with, versus trying to go find a bunch of speaking engagements. Have that as a hook to get them to say yes when you do reach out.
Right. Okay. Okay. That's good advice. And just curious, in your world, um, as you look at all the things that agencies can do, how much of what you guys do at Barclay is orchestrated and organized versus, opportunistic and more sort of randomized, depending on sort of what the situation is? Can you provide, some perspective to agencies as to how you guys manage your new business development process?
Sure. Um, I would like to say that it definitely has become more organized
Okay.
and thoughtful going forward, specifically around the content plan. But I fully admit we've been building this for the last 8 years, like really focusing on leading with content and speaking engagements, et cetera. So it's been an evolution, but we really do try to focus now that here are the verticals, and we've tested and learned a lot along the way a lot. So now it's okay. Here are the things that worked. Here are the verticals we're going to go after. So we put that model together again, like research as a core, and then books and white papers around that, and the speaking tours. So we do have a pretty organized model, but it really did start off with a lot of small bets in a lot of places and see what worked and what didn't work, and
Right.
form from there. The more opportunistic, I would say, would be, and I was a little surprised to see this as low as it is public relations.
Mhm.
Um, that is, again, that takes work and some specialty. I think it's the whole cobbler's kid sort of approach that, as an agency, we focus on, developing communications and PR for our clients. But when we look at ourselves, oftentimes we don't do that. And that's one place that we've actually put an emphasis.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually what we did in that space, because we self-admitted ourselves that, hey, we may want to go get outside help, so that we've got somebody focusing on us, treating us
Right.
like a client. So that's a place. It does tend to be more opportunistic, obviously based on the work that you're developing, or case studies that develop. But that would be more of the opportunistic, but again, a conscious focus for us that we've seen good results from.
Cool. That's great. Um, So, moving on to the next question, we asked, what metrics do you use to help you determine if your prospecting efforts are working? And if we said if there are none that you're using, please write none. Personally, I was surprised to see that so many agencies say that they don't use any metrics. I guess just play devil's advocate here and just say, so what? Why is that a problem? Why do I need to quantify my every step in the new business development process? Maybe you can speak to why you feel that's important.
Sure. And I had the same surprised reaction. I actually counted through the list, and it was over a third had listed none.
Yeah.
And to me, that's scary, especially when I go back to the point where, if you look in some of the open comments, people are listing their challenges, which I think is the next question, is again lack of resources or lack of dedication. It's hard to make a justification for, I need help if I don't know what elements of my just like you would tell your own clients, what
Sure.
elements of my marketing plan are working or not working.
Right.
So we think it's really important to start at the funnel, and using the old school funnel analysis up at the top, what's working and even if we don't get to a closed win, what's our our rate of moving people through that funnel so we can determine where the challenge or the issue is and then fix it there. Because if you don't know, you don't know what to fix. So you might have an amazing program getting people in, you're just not winning pitches. Well, that may have to do with your pitch team. That may have to be, there's issues there that may not be upper funnel that are doing great. So I think it's important to have an understanding throughout what you're doing and what's working, what's not working, so you can then ask for those investments and obviously do more of.
Right. Are you measuring proposals relative to, initial conversations, closes relative to pitches, so that you have some Barkley benchmarks that you can ongoing sort of measure yourself against? Or how would you suggest an agency do it?
Yep. And so, and we'll self-admit that we're just getting more sophisticated in this ourselves.
Okay.
We've been a little bit loose maybe in the past on, really managing that funnel. And what we've done the last 24 months is we've invested in Salesforce. So we've got a very specific so we are at every step from first phone call to first outreach. How many people responded to that? Where did those conversations lead to proposals, from proposals to pitches or presentations to close?
Right.
And really trying to capture the tactics that we used along each one of those funnels, and so that we can measure that. So we're just now getting the benchmarks. We've had the benchmarks in place, so now we're really starting to learn and optimize from that. But it's an effort. I mean, it did that. That was another one where we went outside to help us. We brought in some Salesforce experts who do this to come and consult with us to make sure we had the program set up in an optimal way. And it's like anything else we've learned along the way, and we've baited and tested and adjusted. But it's really helpful, especially when you're going into the next year. If you can get to that point where you're somewhat accurate to understand how many people you have in the pipeline, and you're making projections for what the revenue is going to be next year and what your new business plug is, what can we convert over time? So you can start to get pretty smart and analytic about that. So there's obviously a big benefit, outside of just what's working to win. It's forecasting for revenue for the agency. So that's there as well.
And you've probably seen it. I know we see it among our agency clients. We see it in our surveys, where project work has become kind of the sampling mechanism of choice among marketers. It's the way of testing the waters with a Barkley or any other agency. So if, obviously the initial project, may be relatively small, or, certainly not at the level that you'd want an ongoing relationship to be at. How do you factor that in when you're trying to establish, projections or measure effectiveness of programs? Because, obviously what sits behind a project, future work, can vary by company, and you're only as good as what you delivered the day before. So maybe you can speak to that. Any advice on how to think about that as it relates to forecasting and using metrics and things like that?
No, it's a great point, and we are absolutely, I think every agency's seeing that and feeling that. What's been helpful for us specifically, leveraging Salesforce as a tool, is that when we input those, which then become clients, we're clear to delineate which AOR versus which projects, so that we can track over time what the organic growth is. So this, when I say, I probably use the term new business a lot in this conversation, what I really mean is growth, because we look at it both from net new client as well as growth of clients and existing clients. So from a project standpoint, we're putting together what we can have somewhat of a predictable. Is it a 3x? Is it a 10x based on that initial project? And what is the percentage of that reoccurring, so that we have that data?
Got it.
Do we have it perfectly yet? No, but we are tracking it so that we can try to get to some sort of accurate estimate of.
That's great. Yeah, because I know that's tough for a lot of agencies to be able to manage organic growth as if it's new business, and a new business development effort, and to be able to track it and create some metrics around it, or establish some measure of accountability. All those things are important, and that's where you look at any survey among agencies, and if it's not referrals and networking, it's usually organic growth that's
Yeah.
helping drive the agency. So that's great. That's great that you're doing that. Any other comments or thoughts on this particular question before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think for those that are at none, um, don't try to what's the cliche? Don't try to eat the elephant or at one time. It's like just what's the least viable option that you can put in place that at least gets you to start measuring something.
Right.
You don't have to overcomplicate it. Just get started.
Yeah.
Like find what is the base way that's easy and manageable, and from there you'll grow. And I think you'll find that the more metrics you have in place, the more informed you are, the better your results will ultimately be. So just find that starting place that is um, easy for your agency to do.
That's great. Good advice. All right, and then the final question that you provided us for the survey was, are you satisfied with the success of your new business plan or program? And we had about 60, close to 65% of respondents say that they were not satisfied with the success of their program. And the range of responses were varied, not in my opinion, not terribly surprising, the
Right.
things that we were seeing. I guess any difference in your opinion, a smaller agency that maybe has 25 to 50 people versus a larger firm like yours, are there different issues that are sort of getting in the way of success, or do you think they are fairly consistent regardless of the size of the agency?
I think the one, and I mentioned it earlier, that maybe the barrier is the lack, maybe at a smaller agency, maybe the lack of dedicated personnel for a new business team. We saw that pop up a lot in response to this question of why they didn't feel like they have a successful program in place. And I guess my suggestion would be maybe a couple things. I'd go back to our previous question. Again, if you can measure and show specific tactics that you're putting in place are working, it's a lot easier than to go to the executive team to get more investment for that, which may include whether it's tools or people, more resources
Mm-hmm.
to execute your new business program. So I think measurement becomes even more important in smaller agencies so that you can justify that you may need dedicated staff. And regardless, if you can't get 100% dedicated, you've got to find a way to carve off an ongoing percentage of dedication to new business, because I mean that's the only way you're going to grow. So
Right, right,
uh,
definitely. Yeah. No, I found it interesting. There were some folks that responded saying that like the limited number of closes or leads is what they sort of cited as being, their reason for lack of success. And then you
yeah,
had a whole nother bucket of people that like hadn't even gotten there, that were just, couldn't put the resources against it, the
yeah,
focus, consistency. They hadn't even started yet. And, I think to your point, you know, find somebody, somebody that can carve out some time and dedicate, some effort to it.
right,
To your point earlier on about, the segmenting of content, you don't have to do a whole lot just to
right.
sort of get yourself moving forward. Um,
And
any other perspective around this, or any other surprises or advice given the results here?
sure, maybe it's a more of a point of advice. One of the things that we've done, so yes, we do have some dedicated people on our growth team, but specifically going back to those areas of expertise, to which we'll get into segmentation and vertical. We go to our lead account people in those groups. So we have somebody who's a CPG expert, and someone who's an ag expert, somebody a retail expert. And part of their job at the senior levels, we carve out a specific percent of time that not only does the content they generate and the thought leadership applicable to new business, but obviously for the clients that they work with.
Hmm.
So, even at our size, where we do have some dedicated people, we do have others within the agencies so that we get to that segmented expertise. That's not all coming from the growth team. We're going
Right.
going outside, and that's part of the job description and what we expect and ask of some of our senior folks. So
Cool. That's
uh,
great.
that's one way to look at it. And the other, and you mentioned it, the other piece that might have been not necessarily surprising, but tied to that non-dedicated staff was the lack of a regular pipeline. Sound
Right.
like it comes in spurts, and then and you said it, like one of the keys is you never know when it's coming, so you have to be consistent. So I
Yeah.
mean, you just have to find that discipline to find a way to be consistent with your outreach program and content
Yeah.
program. So.
Cool. Well, any last words of advice that you can share with agencies as we, begin our, can't believe we're talking about the closeout of 18 here and rolling into 19, but as agencies start thinking about, building their business in 2019, any, general specific words of wisdom that we can leave folks with?
Sure. I think I would challenge you to go back and look at as you're going into 2019, and we've discussed it. What are those key performance indicators? And if you don't have a program in place for that right now, just sit down with the senior group at the agency and look back, and have conversations about what has worked in the past and how you could potentially measure that, and try to put a few, again, you don't have to overcomplicate it, a few KPIs in place so that you at least get in the rhythm of creating metrics and holding yourself to a program going forward. So again, start small. Place a small bet. You don't have to tackle the whole thing all at once. Just
Right.
get started.
Yep, absolutely. That's key. Start it and keep doing it.
Right. Yep. You'll see benefit and it'll grow, but you got to
Right,
get started somewhere. So
right. Yep. Well, great. All right. Well, listen, Jason, really appreciate the time today. Know you're a busy man and, appreciate all the input and insights. I'm sure they'll all be very helpful to the folks watching us today. Just as a reminder that Jason is heading up the new business effort at Barkley. He's helped spearhead the growth of Barkley over the past 5 years, leading them to become one of the largest independent agencies in the country. He's led business development efforts and ongoing strategy for brands including Target, Dairy Queen, Spirit Airlines, Applebee's, and Hershey's. He's done great things with the agency, and as always, it's a pleasure to speak with you, Jason. Thanks so much for the input, and look forward to seeing you again sometime somewhere around this country.
you bet.
All right.
Thanks, Mark.